so for many Hungarians, because of the influx or the era of the Ottoman Empire, that's why I'm saying like they were looking sort of like for a pure Hungarian culture, which is why they were so attracted to Transylvania, okay? And also because it was very, I mean, Maramureş today is a rural backwater. If you Google it to go on holiday there, you're going to be told it's unspoilt, that the peasant way of life has hardly changed. So if you put in the sort of like into the cultural mix, that it's not industrialized, that it hasn't suffered the deprivations of urbanization, has a strong sense of community. This is the reason why so many artists head towards Transylvania or this area of Maramureş, which for many people is still essentially the Transylvanian experience. Okay, so this is the colony of artists. So we've got the Goddalloy Colony, and now we're looking at this. If it was the Romanian name, Baia Mare, it's a lot easier than the Hungarian name with the Nagy bit at the front, Nagy Banya. Okay, hopefully that's not too far off how I'm supposed to say it. Now, the interesting thing about this lot is that they are very French. Okay, they're completely influenced because of their international education, with many of them studying in Munich. Remember, there's no academy in Budapest at this point in time. So they all head to Munich to study under Simon Holossi, or they head to Paris, where many of them study at the Academy Julienne. So again, we'll see what I mean in terms of Ripple Ronai in a minute, who goes on that particular course of action. So you can see here, this is as late as 1912, but it's very heavily influenced by French Impressionism, and even more so, I think, Vincent van Gogh, who becomes very well known across Europe after 1890 when he dies. His brother Theo dies shortly after, and it's Theo's widow that organizes a series of international exhibitions that sort of spread the Van Gogh vision throughout Europe very quickly. It's the sky, I think, here that makes me think of Van Gogh. And he was central to the Nagybayana colony until he left in 1901. That's Simon Holossi. He just goes off to found another colony, also in that Maramureş Transylvanian area. Bella Grunewald, or Ivani Grunewald, drying clothes here. I mean, this is the quintessential, isn't it, haystack image, courtesy of Monet. He paints his haystacks around about 1890. I love the washing in front. And again, you can perhaps see some influence, well, with the influences coming from French Impressionism, but also there's some influence coming from artists like Jules Bastien Lepage. So my reason for including these is that you've got this complex tension, I think would be a way to describe it, between this desire to find Hungarian culture, but also the internationalism of the era, because these artists are traveling beyond the borders of their homeland, but then bringing their ideas back and then founding their colony, in this, let's be honest, Hungarian backwater. So this is Grunewald, again, beautiful motif of horses watering. It links through to Károly Ferenczik, who is, again, this is a very important painting, the Bird Song one of 1893. Again, perhaps because it links to, Hungarian mythic culture. This has become almost like a, one of the paintings that the Hungarians have on their walls at home. Earlier in his career, in front of the post, this is 1891, and perhaps shows you the influence of French realism, Gustave Courbet, but particularly Jules Bastien Lepage. So he goes from realism, which you're seeing on your right, I love the gendarmes or policemen in the background, to symbolism in the 1890s. But what really interests me about the Nagybayana colony is that they sort of go through realism and symbolism, and then in what would be our Edwardian period, the noughties of the new 20th century, they seem to go back to en plein air painting. They're in this rural idyll, So not surprisingly, the rural idyll becomes the subject of their paintings. So this is a beautiful image of boys bathing, which again is rather Newlyn school-like, isn't it, in terms of its almost pantheistic joy in the beauties of nature, Caroli. And I wish you could see this in the flesh, because my photograph of October does not do it any justice at all. It is a stunning essay in light. That's the umbrella, of course, is the umbrella that he would use as an artist, this is Caroli, to cast an even light over his canvas. And I particularly also like, you know, the wife and the husband, wonderful, again, painter of light in the opening years of the new century. Here's a close-up. Again, the coloured shadows sort of tell you that he's very much following in the footsteps here of the French Impressionists. And all of these, I haven't put where they are because they are all in the Hungarian National Gallery, which is where you're going to have to go to see them. I don't think there's even one major Hungarian artist represented in a British collection. Please do correct me on that point. But of course, there are quite a few in Paris, as you'll see in a minute, the work of Ripple Ronai. So this is my last painting by Caroli. So Ripple Ronai is the sort of big international name. I know you've never heard of him. I hadn't either until I actually went to Budapest for the first time. But Joseph Ripple Ronai is a nabby. I love the nabby. Again, they're not so well known in this country. The nabby are a group of artists who surround Serusier. Serusier had gone off to Pont-Aven to meet Gogh, and he comes back with what is known as the Talisman. It was a little sketch on top of a cigar box, which showed a new vision of painting known as cloisonnéism or divisionism, which was being pioneered not only by Gogh, but by Émile Bernard. The idea was to sort of create big black lines around objects and to create cloisons of colour. We think that Ripple Ronai met the nabby, it means a prophet in Hebrew, and the principal artists involved with it are Bonnard and Ransom and Vuillard, and I think Valeton at some point was associated with the nabby. They are very English in their outlook, the nabby, because again, having read William Morris, they like the idea of art going beyond the canvas. So they're going to be involved in designing and also in creating murals for interiors. This is important for understanding the direction that Ripple Ronai will go in. So his breakthrough painting, though you may not think of it, at the inn at Pont-Aven, shows that he actually went to Pont-Aven and actually met all these artists, you know, directly. It's not a question of him sort of reading about them or discovering them at exhibition. He was actually part of the nabby group. He's known as the Hungarian nabby in the way that, you know, Maurice Denis is known as the religious or sacred nabby. Maurice Denis, wonderful collection at Saint-Germain. And the sort of like almost like realist image, almost like, you know, Manet, not, you know, not influenced by the en plein airism of French Impressionism, is on the left-hand side. So that's the inn at Pont-Aven. But on the right-hand side, we have this new cloisonné technique that Ripple Ronai will develop due to his connections to the nabby. And his breakthrough painting was My Grandmother of 1894, which was praised at the time as a sensitive evocation of the melancholy of old age. In other words, it's been inspired by Whistler's own mother, Ripple Ronai. So in the 1890s, I think you would definitely say that he was a symbolist, but he's also influenced by Japanism. Many of his works are narrow format, what we call a pillar style, taken from Chinese painting and Japanese woodcuts, seen particularly in the girl in the polka dot dress. The one with a bird cage, again, is that sort of rather when, you know, everything's very blue in this, which was again typical of the 1890s. This the entire school of artists who paint in this evocative blue color. Again, it has a very strong melancholia to it. I'm a young lady looking at her canary. It's a very large work, by the way, over 4 feet high. A lady with a black veil, 1896. So the Hungarian nabby is being very influenced by the Japanism, which is prevalent within the nabby group. 1980s, now he returns to Hungary. 1902, he's going to settle in his home village of Kospava and sort of live the rural idyll, as you will see. And this is typical of his style. So he's sort of like moved out of his intense symbolism, and but very much like the so-called intimists. You might have come across the works of people like Vuillard in particular, who's often referred to as an intimist because he only painted domestic interiors, or that was his preferred subject. This is Christmas 1903. I like the Hungarian tree in the background. But it was working with the nabby in particular that led Ripple-Ronay to spread his wings out of the decorative art, out of the fine arts and into the decorative arts. So he's given this big commission in 1896 to decorate the Andrassy dining room, as we refer to it, and also supplied furniture for this palace in Budapest. This is no longer in Budapest. It's been reconstructed in the Ripple-Ronay Museum in Kospava. That's the amazing stained glass ceiling of fanlight. I love where the extractor fan is. The stained glass windows had to be reconstructed. Originally, it was supplied by Ziggurat, and also Ripple-Ronay designed all the furniture that you're looking at in this interior. Fab. And it was, as I said, that project, 1896, appears to allow him to spread his wings. So this is a good example on the 1896 woman dressed in white of his cloisonne style. Can you see how the negative here, it's just not delineated, but you've got these strong flat patches of white. And this division, and it's sometimes known as divisionism, it's related to pointillism and the cloisonne technique of the Pontevin group, may have been encouraged by his interest in tapestry. So Young Woman with a Rose is in the Museum of Applied Art, and I hope that you spotted it was actually over the fireplace, or a version of it, because of course being a tapestry, it was woven more than once. And again, you have this sort of very strong outline and flat colour, which was ideal for designing for stained glass, which he also did. He designs for stained glass, and he designs for textiles. But most importantly, he designs for Jaulnay. So these are all Jaulnay pieces, mostly in, well, nearly all of them in Eocene, that are all said to be designed by Ripple-Ronay. And these the same. These are also, in fact, I think the bottom one was, again, the idea of designing for Jaulnay comes out of the Andrassy dining room, because he's asked again to design the porcelain to use on the table. Herend is the great porcelain manufacturer in Hungary. And then, bearing in mind that what he's developing is a divisionist technique, whether you're looking at the cloisonne concept of Gogh and Bernard, or the pointillism of people like Seurat and Seignac, Ripple-Ronay sort of develops this into what he refers to as his corn kernel style. Corn as in little, you know, bits of yellow corn. These are more like squares, as you can see, of applied paint, very thick, not, you know, each individual brush stroke applied with a square brush, and now immensely bright colours. This one's 1909, so by this stage he's bound to be influenced by the Fauves and the nabby. So like I said, he returned to Kaposvár, which is his birthplace, and that is where you'll find the reconstruction of the Andrassy dining room. He will eventually purchase the Roma Villa in 1908. That's now devoted to his life story, where you'll also find lots of paintings by Ripperoni. And this one's in the garden, dates to 1909, and it's a good example again of this rather strange, as he calls it, not me, corn kernel style. He has a beautiful wife. This is Lazarine and Aniela, that's his daughter, in the park. And again, my reason for showing it is I think you can see very clearly his unusual technique. I know of no other artist who really does paint like this, and as you can see, often on a large scale. And this close-up of a work, again, of Lazarine is his wife, and Aniela will marry and become Annetta Paris. And I think she's an artist in her own right. But this one dates to 1911. Again, it's just to show you what I mean about how the brushstrokes are so easy to read, these tashes or squares of paint. But this was ideal for mural work. So I'm going to put a long post eventually on my webpage about the Schiffer Palace. It's like the Stocklet Palace. It really is a palace of art. It's sadly now the Museum of Money and Taxes. Talk about a wasted opportunity, but at least it has survived in Budapest. And this is as close as you're going to get in terms of actually seeing the survival of a Gesamtkunstwerk, where many artists work on the interior of the Villa Schiffer, which was for one of the leading industrialists in Budapest at the turn of the century. So this technique that he develops was absolutely ideal for mural work. The painting survives, it's in the National Gallery, but I'm showing you here the location for which it was painted in the Schiffer Villa. And that brings me very nicely to architecture, which of course is really the main reason that we really know about the Budapest Secession. We don't know anywhere near as much about the artists that I've just been showing you, because of course you really have got to go there to see them. Lechner, however, has acquired sort of like the same sort of reputation as Gaudi in Barcelona, because his buildings are so distinctive. So the Hungarian Gaudi, here he is. Now he is going to try to convince people that he can create a national Hungarian style by looking at the architecture of northern India, remembering using this idea of Sanskrit, the language, the ethnicity of Hungarians could be really rooted in their different language. As I say, the only other language close to Hungarian is Finnish. So they also borrow particularly from Finnish secession, or as they call it up there, Jugendstil forms. We've got three important buildings that have survived in Budapest. They are the Geological Institute, the Decorative Arts Museum, the Geological Institute, and the Postal Savings Bank. The defining element will often be the use of Zsolnay. So walking along one of the main roads in Budapest, it's now the sort of like shopping precinct, you will find the Tonné building. Tonné as in the famous bentwood furniture manufacturers of Vienna. Steel structure with a curtain wall, and very much in, as you can see, a Renaissance Gothic style. The whole curtain made up of Zsolnay terracotta. And it will undoubtedly be the use of Zsolnay tiles, both inside and out, that will really make Lechner's buildings distinctive. So it was to be completed for the millennial moment, 1896, and was actually opened on time by Franz Josef. And this was a crossover between sort of Hungarian folk art motifs, as you'll see in a minute, and this idea that he could forge an architectural style by looking at Indian prototypes. Part of this was born out of the fact that they didn't really know where Attila the Hun had come from, or even for that matter, the seven tribes, the seven chieftains, you know, led by Arpad. They weren't quite sure where they had come from. Could have been the Russian steppes, could have been Rajasthan. At least that is exactly what Lechner argued. He also looked to Britain. He came to visit us, particularly in the late 1880s. He was very taken with the Natural History Museum, which, as you know, is all terracotta. He also looked at Anglo-Indian architectural forms, like the famous Mumbai Victoria Terminus. So as you can see, this is supposed to be a blend of Italianate Gothic revival, i.e. Venice, which you can see a bit of the Doge's Palace there, with Indian traditional building, largely from Rajasthan. It's the peacock elements, the peacock arches. You'll see one in a minute. And that may also account for the colour. So one of the most spectacular elements about Lechner's buildings are their roofs, who rather amusingly, he said, as one of his students said, but nobody can see them. And Lechner said, yeah, but the birds can. So the birds clearly, as you can see, looking down on the Decorative Arts Museum, had a feast in terms of gold and yellow. And this is currently still, I think, shut. It's been undergoing a major reconstruction since, in fact, I've been visiting Budapest in 2017. They had a wonderful director called Aragosh, who went to all of the big exhibitions, Vienna 73, Paris 78, Paris 1889, buying stuff. So it's like a V&A, it's fabulous. But the director was very keen to buy what you and I would call modern art, particularly the decorative arts. I mean, they bought the whole of Alexander Bigot's display at Paris 1900. He was France's leading Art Nouveau ceramicist, Alexander Bigot, and took it all to Budapest. Here's the entrance. And looking up at the ceiling, you can see here what I mean about Lechner purloining embroidery forms, essentially. So here's some embroidery for you to compare it to. So back to Transylvania, where the purest forms of folk art were said to be found. At the top, stylized tulips, but also cornflowers. They tend to flatten the elements, stylize them, and then they're sort of locked together in undulating patterns, as you can see. And in the late 1880s, there was a very important book published, which was like a pattern book of Hungarian folk art motifs. So late 80s, almost like Owen Jones's Grammar of Ornament, but this was a grammar of ornament based on Hungarian embroidery patterns. Miska Rott, so he's our stained glass designer. You can see here how he's adapted the tulip in mosaic for the fireplace at the top. These, the folk art forms based on flowers, but down the bottom you can see here this mosaic on the central image with the stylized daffodils. Looks very French Art Nouveau, doesn't it, in that whiplash motif? And he's at the cutting edge again of new technologies. So he's our Tiffany, but also here in the mosaic, it's a combination of Jaulnet ceramics and glass mosaic. So it's the Ravenna style of glass mosaic. So what Lechner does is he takes these embroidery motifs and blows them up to a giant scale, as you can see here in one of the etched glass over doors. This is over one of the doors in the Geological Institute, which was his next major project after the Decorative Arts Museum. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But the idea is that he will take these embroidery forms and expand them. Here in Jaulnet, these are the banisters as you enter the Decorative Arts Museum. This is the central atrium with its glass roof, fanlight, but you can see here what I mean about it being based on a palace in Rajasthan, the peacock shape, as we refer to it, of the Custard Arches. This is what it's based on, the famous Red Fort at Jodhpur in Rajasthan. I confess I haven't been to visit, so I borrowed this from the internet. And here's a better view of one of these Custard Arches, which are then replicated in the atrium of the Decorative Arts Museum. So this is a really weird idea, isn't it? This is looking for the origins of Hungarian culture in Rajasthan architecture. Yes, the authorities were not that keen. The most spectacular, almost Gothic deployments of these Custard Arches, not that far from the OG arch, which is so popular in Europe, in the 1200s, is the staircase and the fanlight above it, which almost like Rajasthan meets Rococo. What a lovely idea, with a wonderful fanlight, again by, you guessed it, Miska Orot. He's the leading workshop in Budapest at this time. So here's the Geological Museum in Budapest. This is very difficult to get into. You've got to arrange a private visit. This is now classic Lechner style. So he's taken those Indian forms and turned them into a tracery of brickwork, which goes all around the windows. There's a sort of Renaissance element that comes in along that roof line. He looks, again, remember I mentioned Matthias Corvinus, who introduces Renaissance culture into Hungary in the 15th century. So again, it's sort of a blending of lots of different elements, but again, it's very modern looking, because after all, it is a geological museum devoted really to mining. When you go around it, there are lots of references to mining and miners. What I really love is the ball on the top, which is Atlas. Literally, there's 4 figures in Jolnay ceramics holding up. This is Africa on this side. I'm holding up a globe. And you see here what I mean about framing the windows with the brickwork, and the reference to mining, the 2 hammers here at the entrance, and that sort of Renaissance gable running along the top. A really weird and confusing, I think, blend of elements for anybody who has never come across Lechner before. This is the atrium entrance, and that's the concierge's office down the bottom. Look at the amazing etched glass. That's all by Miskorot. He was expected to produce miles of decorative glass, and he realized that you couldn't do all this as lead work. So he really specialized in this acid etched glass. Here are my peacock Custard arches, and sometimes you get a full-blown rosette, as you can see here. And the weird thing is that within these Custard arches and rosettes, you've got all of these references to Hungarian embroidery motifs, particularly his beloved tulip. This is supposed to be a tulip on the left-hand side, sort of like a ragged tulip, you know, but looks very sort of French Art Nouveau as well in many ways, with those rather beautiful curvilinear elements. So just when you go to visit the Geological Institute, the idea was to create almost the illusion of tunnels in the loosest way. Well, really, that's a bit, I think they say that, but it's too light and airy really for it to look too much like tunnels. But you have these long corridors with these very elaborate ceilings. It's almost like the 2 fan vaults here. It's like an adaptation of Gothic in some ways, isn't it? Gothic meets Indian, with embroidery motifs derived from Hungarian folk art prototypes. Yes, you've got a good example of what I mean by eclectic. I really love the staircase. This is right at the top of the staircase, which leads to the public rooms at the top. And the staircase, again, got this wonderful, as you can see, ripple going all the way down it. And the Custard arches here are very clear. So I have never had the good fortune to visit inside the Postal Savings Bank. If you've ever been to Vienna, you know, the Postal Savings Bank there is really famous by Otto Wagner. It's often said to be the first modernist building in Europe. It dates to 1904 to 1907 and is done in Otto Wagner's use style. This is not in any new utilitarian style at all, but again, a celebration of Hungarian culture. Even more so here, the Indian elements have now, to a large extent, dropped away, and Lechner is really focusing on the folk art, and also this idea that you could have a Hun, as in Attila the Hun, version of Hungarian Secession. So I photographed it here coming down on the funicular from Buda. Remember those birds enjoying the rooftop? And you can see it's like a fortress. It's flat all the way around. The only slight deviation is the slightly projecting central portion. It's all about, looks like a piece of embroidery, doesn't it? With all of these complicated cartouches with heraldic coats of arms, but again, blown up embroidery motifs, as you can see here in the central section above the entrance. What's marching up the building are bees. All these little, if hopefully my cursor is working. If it's not, look at the corner of the building. There's a beehive at the top in Jaulnay, and all the bees are making their way up to the hive at the top. And you can see, perhaps see the bees better now, heading for the hive. The other element is snakes, all the way along the roof line, which is said to be Hungarian Renaissance, by the way, are snakes, interwoven snakes. You can see the head of one right on the corner column. Now, they're either, here you can see them better. Can you see they look like Nessie the dinosaur here, the snake head, again, the sort of curve, and all the way along the top of the ridge post, supposed to be snakes. Sometimes they look almost like birds' heads as well. But this element here, the lower level, is the snake running all the way through. Now, is the snake protecting your money, or is it trying to abscond? The concept of a postal savings bank, by the way, was to encourage small savers who would put in their few coppers in their local post office. It's a concept based on an idea by George Koch, who was the instigator of the Austrian Postal Savings Bank, and it was specifically designed for the small saver, and they wanted a building that spoke of Hungarian life rather than overly privileged bankers. Anyway, that was the idea of making it so folksy. So here's a close-up, again showing you the overblown embroidery motifs, but perhaps you can really see the snakes coming up now in these strange elements at the end of the building. The thing behind it is to catch the lightning. It's not illuminated, but the snakes sort of come up into crowns at either end of the flanking towers. And all of this is based, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the name of where this hoard was found, but all of the, a lot of the motifs on the buildings are based on this wonderful treasure that was found. I can do the nudge bit at the front, Miklos at the end. The hoard is now in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. The Hungarians would like it back now, please, though it may well be in present-day Romania where it was found. But this is a sort of like Elgin Marbles moment. You know, this gold, this fabulous gold, was said to have originally belonged to Attila the Hun, no less, and therefore was 5th century in date. In fact, we know that it is later, and probably belongs to the breakup of the Roman Empire in the 7th century. But the important thing is the bulls. The bulls here on the gold cups are then replicated, as you can see here, and the shape of this tower that the bulls are decorating is said to be based on the tents of the Hungarian Attila the Hun warriors. Fanciful but lovely idea. And this is just the only image that I have of the interior, which, as you can see, uses a lot of beautiful acid etched glass by Ziggurat. And just to conclude, in the last few minutes that we have, I've still always got too much stuff. We have architects who follow the Lechner school, and Armin Hegedius is a good example of that. You can see it's got all the Lechner hallmarks, the like tracery shapes around the window, and the use of Jaulnay and mosaics. The mosaics are charming, gigantic tulips, and because it was a boys and girls school, we have mosaics showing different activities, blind man's buff, doing our maths, singing, and you know, it was still segregated, by the way, boys entrance, girls entrance, until the 1960s. But what tends to happen is the architects move away from the Lechner style. The government did not approve of it. It was too peasanty. They felt that that the Secession style sort of harked back too much. The government, which is Austro-Hungarian, remember, they want the architects to look west. They want Hungary to join in a sort of pan-European architectural style. They also want architects to adopt all the new technology. So just a few years later, in 1906, This is the same architect, Armin Hegadius, producing this modern concrete framed building with a glass facade in, you know, in a very modern style, more glass than concrete or any other type of masonry. But it does have this fabulous mosaic at the top by Mishka Rott, which we started with, of Hungary enthroned. Love her. And the link here is very obvious with Vienna. So here's a close-up of Medusa. There is two in this instance, heads of Medusa at the top, and they obviously link directly to the Vienna Secession building in Vienna by Josef Olbrecht, which dates to 1898. And Bella Laccia also seems to have gone the same way. So he starts off as a pupil of Lechner. He is Jewish, so he designs a lot of Jewish associated buildings, like the School for Blindness for Jewish pupils, but most famously for the Sandor Schmidl family in the Jewish cemetery in Budapest. He designs in this Lechner style, this truly awesome family mausoleum. You couldn't get more idiosyncratic than that, could you? And then he goes Viennese. So he's often associated with a younger generation of architects known as the Youngs. And as you can see here, he's gone Western. So this famous department store, in fact, it was originally a tailor's shop in the center. It's actually literally next door to the one with the big mosaic on it. Looks very Wiener Werkstatt, doesn't it, in terms of its geometric forms. But in fact, many of the motifs that he adapted, well, yes, you've guessed it, you can find in Transylvania. So it was sort of like taking the idea of geometric forms from the Wiener Werkstatt, but giving them a Hungarian twist by relating them back to Transylvanian folk art. Evidently, they're very close to motifs from the Aldali region. And he's also responsible for this wonderful confection, which is the Parisienne. It's actually spelled out for us along the top. Nightclub as first built, now a small theatre. This was completely destroyed post Second World War and reconstructed as you see it now in the late 80s, early 1990s. And I love it, but it's, you know, it's all over the place in terms of trying to work out its sources. There's a lot of Vienna Secession going on here, obviously, in the Parisian nightclub, but particularly with these standing female figures along the top. And these, again, these geometric forms that you could say were Wiener Werkstatt in terms of their influence, but they've been given a Hungarian folk art twist. So, and this ziggurat element, which again could easily derive, ironically, from Islamic art forms, the ziggurat shape that you're looking at here, and those beautiful, this beautiful figure that you're looking at here in bronze is positioned above. Bella Laccia. And Karoli Koz is going to be part of this youngers group, the young ones. He's most famous for Budapest Zoo, which, if I say this is based on Transylvanian prototypes, you're going to think I'm making it up. But at this stage, he wanted the animals to have, and he designed many of the houses for the animals within the zoo. He wanted the animals to have a building that represented their homeland. Though how you're supposed to represent in one building the homeland of elephants, polar bears, and allegedly in the crown at the top is where the mice live, you'll be pleased to know. I love this building though. I know that anybody who sees it, it's magical. This is what, you know, Art Nouveau, Jugendstil, Secession does. It blows your mind sometimes in terms of its outrageousness. And down the bottom, I love the elephants, even more when you go around to the middle of them and you find that, you know, the Indian keeper is nestled between his two elephants. So the elephant house was designed to be appropriate to an elephant. So it was designed by Karoli Koz in what he saw as an appropriate style. I love it. Again, Jolnay, and the decoration around the domes is hysterical. It's rhinoceroses and hippopotami in Jolnay ceramic. And the whole of the inside too is entirely tiled in Jolnay. Over one of the other doors is a close-up of it. You can see more rhinos and what appear to in fact be dinosaurs, which I rather like the idea of. And then the mascaron, the mask in the center, is an elephant. Don't you just love it when architects completely go off onto a flight of fancy? But Korolikos was really at the heart of this younger generation, the youngers, and he's very much looks to Transylvania in terms of his vernacular architectural forms. And working with his chum, Desiro Kromeski, they create what is known as the Verkala Telep. It's essentially the Verkala Telep. It's named for Sandor Verkala. He was then Prime Minister, and this is Bedford Park, or Hampstead Garden suburb, Hungarian style. It was designed for the workers as a garden suburb. It's not a garden city, though they had already Ebenezer Howard by that stage. There was no industry there, but the idea was that this was like a village in the city, and you can see that many of its architectural forms, this is the gate entering the Verkala Telep. You can see here they're going back to these famous farmstead gates from the eastern Transylvania area, which is now Romania. And remember, I showed you one of these that had actually been removed and taken to the millennial celebrations in 1896. So I think that's actually a genuine gate. So this is actually created by many architects. I didn't want to overwhelm you with all their different names, but the project was overlooked by Korolikos. So it's his vision. So he wanted the main square to sort of to almost be a lexicon of contemporary architects. It's one of his own buildings, and as you can see, it's turrets, roof line, lots of woodwork, the roof line with all of the, again, decorative barge boards and rather charming dormer windows. So there's the dormer window, 1926, this one is dated to. So this is social housing, Transylvanian style. What a lovely idea. Turrets, and some of the forms, this is the last part I'm going to finish with, some of the forms like that entrance down there, very clearly taken from Finnish Jugendstil architectural forms. So again, this, we're just going around the main square of the Verkala Telep. Only had about 20 minutes there, but it gives you an idea of its Transylvanian character. And that's the other gateway. So everything centers on this park with this rather nice fountain in the middle. So that takes me to my sort of last major, what it's often referred to as folk art secession. I nicknamed it Hungarian because fundamentally it's this idea of going in search of a full, you know, a rich Hungarian tradition, going back to Attila the Hun and those 7 original chieftains. But this amazing Lutheran church, we're now back in the center of Budapest, is also borrowing very heavily from Finnish Jugendstil. Remember, they could borrow Finland because they thought that they shared, or they do in fact share, the same root to their language, Sanskrit. So this is an overview of it. Again, I've never got into it. I wish it's fantastic inside, more Viennese than anything inside, but it's always been shut when I've been there. This is Aladar RK. It's his masterpiece. And it uses a lot of Finnish forms seen in that doorway to the tower on the right-hand side, but particularly, you know, I'm comparing it here. This is Lars Sonck, one of Finland's big Jugendstil architects. And it's that strange sort of slightly rounded shape to the arch, which we are referring here to Finnish, okay, in terms of its sort of architectural source. And the other thing that's obviously, these again are Lars Sonck, lovely name, isn't it? Sonck. On the right hand side, it's sort of like rounded shoulders and rounded top, seen also in the triple window, and then linked over to the doorway of the Lutheran church back in Budapest. It's on a road parallel with Andrassy. And this is back to the entrance. Again, firstly, let me just show you the tiles, which are obviously all related to embroidery prototypes, tulips in particular, and stylized birds. But even more so, the sort of chip carving here on the doorway, you can see here very much links to Transylvanian prototypes. So the chip carving around on the central door here, got an even closer close-up of it here. And then I've put down in the bottom right-hand side a Transylvanian original. So you can see how very clear Arke's, links here between what he sees as a modern architectural style and these Hungarian traditions. So I've run out of time, but I'm going to sweep you through the Gresham Palace because this is where we started. It really will only take 2 minutes. I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but I wanted to emphasize that, the reason that studying Secession is so complex in Hungary is it's not one unified style. You have the Lechner style. You have the Youngs, who are going even further back, or going back to that sort of idea of Attila or Transylvanian culture and vernacular architecture in search of their Hungary. And then you have other architects like Joseph Vago, who want Hungary to look outwards, to be part of a pan-European modernist style known as Art Nouveau, Jugendstil and Secession. And the Gresham Palace absolutely fits the bill. As you go around it, you can see lots of references to Vienna, to Joseph Hoffmann, Koloman Moser, and to the Wiener Werkstätte. The forms are already geometric. A lot of people might easily mistake some of the forms for Art Deco because everything is sort of like squares and cubes. The chap on this side of the tower is said to be Wisdom. It's built by the Gresham Insurance Company as an investment. I think they might have had their offices there, but that is Sir Thomas Gresham, founder of the London Stock Exchange, on the top of it, which may again be the reason why it's in a very international style. And then on the other tower, it's supposed to be beauty or youth, or I think it's supposed to be the arts, because she's holding a lyre. Lots of artists worked on it. This is Geyser Marotti, very interesting character who does a lot of the sculptural work throughout Budapest. And this is representing agriculture. It has one of my favorite motifs, the peacocks, that as you enter. So it was built as a mixture of retail and apartments, but it's now the 5-star Gresham Hotel. So yes, I can't afford to stay there. This is the atrium as it looks, but originally this was shops. So like a Burlington arcade with apartments above. And I want to leave you with one of Mieszko Roth's masterpieces, which is the fireplace of the fanlight, sorry, going too quickly, fanlight of what's called the Kossuth staircase, because it commemorates one of these great Hungarian heroes. This one is the great revolutionary, as you can see, Lajos Kossuth. Remember going back to 1848 and this idea of striving to create an independent Hungary, because what makes Hungarian secession so interesting is this nationalism. And as we are all of us at the moment experiencing nationalism in America, in Hungary, I think it was in Kyrgyzstan this morning, the rise of nationalism, then studying where all, the origins of nationalism in some ways at the end of the 19th century, with the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the First World War, it might help you to understand where we are now by understanding the complexities of these countries and what they've gone through since the end of the First World War, particularly, you know, with the breakup of the empire and what is now modern day Romania, containing the Hungarian heartlands, Transylvania. So this is just to remind you that we're very lucky that anything survives of Gresham Palace. I remember I showed you that it was just the other side of the Danube, on the Pest side, linked to the chain bridge geographically. Only the Kossuth staircase has survived. The others probably were destroyed in the bombardment. So I wanted to leave you again with this image, very poignant image of Hungary at the end of Budapest at the end of the Second World War. The chain bridge totally destroyed. The beautiful palace in Buda, that's now the National Gallery, completely destroyed. And in fact, it's a miracle, both in Vienna and in Budapest, that anything has survived, let alone the Secession buildings. But remember that the history of Hungary post-Second World War, again, its complexities will help you to understand where we are today in terms of Hungarian nationalism.